All right, well, good morning, everybody. All right, good to see you here in person and our online congregation as well. Thank you for joining us this morning. So we are going to jump right into this because I went overtime in the first hour. They almost had to chase me off the stage, but I got a lot to say. Got a lot to say today. Dave kicked this part of I Didn't Realize off last week, talking about evangelism and the people that we see every day in our lives, whether it be at work or at school for our students or work for our students, in the community, at the grocery store, wherever. People that we come into contact with and how open they are to hear about Jesus if we'd be willing to talk to them about it. Today, we're going to look a little further outside of those people that we bump into every day, kind of outside of that bubble. So I was 17 years old and 2 weeks from out of graduating high school, the first time that I left the country. So I was going with a group of other, students and young adults to live in a little village in the mountains in Nicaragua for the summer and help some missionaries and some native pastors do church planting. So we went to this little village called La Cebita and lived there for the summer. And I learned all sorts of things that first time out of the country. But the first thing that happened to us, well, we traveled from Baltimore to Houston to Managua. That's the capital of Nicaragua. Makes sense. That's how you would get there. Our luggage, on the other hand, traveled from Baltimore to Houston, got the first part right, but then decided to make a journey to Beijing, China. Yes, I have socks and t-shirts I still wear that have been to China, and I haven't. I'm a little jealous. But as you can imagine, the process of getting lost luggage to you from China to Nicaragua isn't quite as smooth as when your bag might go to Detroit instead of Chicago, right? That's pretty quick. There's another flight coming later that day, they'll get it to you. Well, that wasn't really the case for us. Not only was it going to take several days for that luggage to get back to the U.S. and then back to Central America, but where we were living was 2.5 or 3 hours up dirt roads and over one mountain and, around another. Not like when the luggage got to the airport, we'd just be able to quickly pack it up. So, 14 days after arriving in Nicaragua, we got our luggage. Now, for those 14 days, we were living with host families in this little village in their little houses, sleeping on a little mattress on a dirt floor, taking, bucket showers in the latrine, and then putting right back on the same clothes. So for 14 days in the tropics, in July, we had just the clothes that we were wearing at the airport in Baltimore 2 weeks earlier with us. But here is the first thing that we learned from that experience. Nobody cared. See, the family that we were living with, there's about 12 of them, and then my friend and I, they didn't have different clothes for every day of the week either. The kids, they wore the same play clothes every day to play. The mom and the grandmother who cooked over a fire all day long and did laundry all day long, well, they wore the same thing to do that every day. The dad and the uncle who went out and worked in labor, they wore the same thing every day as well. So we were just fitting right in to the community. So when our clothes finally came, our big bags of stuff, what we decided to do was just take like another pair of boxers, maybe a t-shirt, a pair of shorts, and we left everything else locked back in the truck outside the village. Because we weren't at that point about to go back into homes with this family we've been living with for the last 2 weeks and bring back bags with more stuff in them than they've ever seen in their life. It just didn't feel like it would be right. So we had a choice to make, our comfort or their comfort. Right? We could have brought all those things and everything we ever wanted for the rest of our time there, but that would have made them feel a little bit uncomfortable. We had made this great connection with the kids and the families and the community and helping get this church up and started, and we just didn't think that it would work well to then show up with all of the stuff that we wanted and potentially damage that relationship that we had built for some extra boxers and pants. The first thing that I want us to understand about missions this morning, it's your first teaching note as well. And this can be hard for us sometimes, but the first one is this. It's not about us and what we want. It's about them and what they need. So what I mean by that is God is calling all of us to serve others, right? It's not optional. It's part of being a follower of Jesus is serving others. But it isn't about us being like the hero that rides in on the white horse and saves the day at all. It's about us serving and what the people we're serving need to be able to live the life that God created them to live. So I'm going to look with you at a Bible story this morning. It's a very popular one, but it will probably not come to shock you that I'm going to look at it in a different way than we have traditionally looked at the story. We're going to talk about Jesus feeding the 5,000. We're not going to talk about the miracle part of it, really. We're not going to talk about the mechanics of it even, really. That's a different sermon for a different time. But what we're going to talk about today is Jesus' reaction to the needs of the people. So I'm going to read for us Matthew 14 to 16, just this part of the story that we're going to talk about. It says this. When Jesus landed in his boat, he was coming across water. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." This is the word of the Lord. So what's happening in this story is Jesus and the disciples were already kind of tired, and they were taking a boat hoping to find a place to rest. But when they got there, there's a whole crowd of people that needed them. Right? Jesus is getting tired. He had just been trying to rest before we picked up these verses. But what ends up happening here is Jesus teaching us several lessons, or teaching the disciples several lessons about missions, just in this short little segment of the story. Kind of get a little bit of a playbook on missions. All right, we already talked a little bit about the first one. Jesus and his disciples, they wanted to sleep. But what was happening wasn't about them and what they wanted. The people were hurting and the people needed them, and Jesus took care of what they needed. All right, the passage tells us that he had compassion on them and he healed their sick. He took care of their needs, their physical needs, because he saw that they were hurting. What I find fascinating, or one of the things I find fascinating about this passage, is what Jesus didn't do. He didn't do a needs assessment. He didn't do a background check. He didn't try and make sure that they really needed the help. Later in the passage, the famous part of the story, he feeds everybody. He didn't make sure that they were really hungry first. He didn't check their financials of all the people to see if they could walk to that other town and buy their own food or not. He saw hungry people, and he fed them because they were hungry. Simple as that. Even for Jesus, it wasn't about him. It was about them. There's another thing that happens in this passage just connected to that I think is vital for us to remember when it comes to missions, and it is that you need to meet physical needs before spiritual needs. Right? The people were hungry. And I mean, when you're hungry, to the point where you're feeling faint and you're unable to concentrate and you're confused thoughts, then you aren't ready to hear about Jesus. Several years ago, before we moved there full time, my son, Logan, my oldest son, I think it was about 10 at the time, 9 or 10, came with me and a couple of friends. We went to Haiti for 2 weeks. There was a church that we work with in Haiti that was going to do a big VBS type program in the summer. And there was a youth group from Illinois, 50 kids and students, who were going to come to help them pull this off. And none of those kids had ever been there before or leaders, so they asked us to work with them leading up to it and then to come host them while they were there and walk them through that. So we did, and when I say large VBS, I mean 800 kids a day came to this VBS at the church location in Haiti. So early on in the planning, I was talking with them, and we were talking about food for the VBS. And I told them something that was once told to me. I'm not even sure where it originated, but I use this line all the time. I used it in Sierra Leone with Pastor Dave and Julie. We were talking about feeding program at the school that we have there. And this is the line I use. I use it all the time. Empty stomachs have no ears. That's your next teaching note. Empty stomachs have no ears. And it's basically what Jesus is saying to the disciples here about the crowd of 5,000 people. So I let this team that was coming know that everything that they were going to be doing that week to teach these 800 kids about Jesus would fall on deaf ears if they hadn't eaten that day. And most of the kids were going to come having not eaten that day. So if you're hungry and your stomach hurts from it, you have a headache from it, and you can't focus because of it, then you won't hear the gospel message. On top of that, and listen to this because it's just as important, it's really hard to tell kids how much Jesus loves them and God will take care of them when they aren't even able to eat every day. Why would they believe you? How much does Jesus really love them if he can't even make sure that they have food? Right? If it's upsetting and uncomfortable for you to hear that this morning, well, good. It should be. And just as uncomfortable as we think it is to hear it, imagine living it every day. You know, we sometimes try and think that maybe we can empathize or understand what it must be like. But I was taught a lesson about that several years ago, 2011, I believe it was, by a 10-year-old girl I know in Haiti named Deborah. And I've known Deborah for years. She lives in the neighborhood of one of our orphanages and plays with our kids. So I've known her for several years. And I was in Haiti, and she was there, and it had become dark. It was time for her to go back to her house. It's about 200 yards or so down the road. And I didn't want her to walk alone, so I was going to go with her. I didn't want to walk back alone, so I took my Haitian friend, who also translates for us, along with me. So the three of us are walking home, or walking to Deborah's house. And we were just chit-chatting about her life and the day and stuff like that. And Deborah, was 10 years old. She had some younger siblings. Her mom had died. Her school had collapsed in the earthquake. She does most of the cooking at home and most of the laundry and all this kind of stuff. And I made the comment, if I could just walk a day in your shoes. And she stopped and looked up at me and said, Papi Matt, umpagen, tennis umpagen. Which means, Papi Matt, that's me, I don't have any shoes, though. I don't have any. And for a second, I thought that she didn't understand the metaphor. But then God spoke through her to me and said, oh, no, she understands the metaphor. You have no idea. We can pretend, we can think, we can empathize, but you can't walk in a day in the shoes of someone who doesn't even have shoes. So with this group setting up this VBS, we decided that since the gospel is important and the kids need to hear it, but empty stomachs have no ears, we are going to prioritize feeding them. So we hired some Haitian moms, and at 4 a.m. each day, they started cooking. And when 800 kids arrived at 9 a.m., the first thing we did was we fed them all. And then while we did the VBS stuff over the next several hours, those moms cleaned all that out and cooked again. And at 2 in the afternoon, we fed them a second time before we sent them home. 1,600 meals a day for 5 days, 8,000 meals that week, because empty stomachs have no ears. Jesus didn't want this crowd to go away because they were hungry. He wanted them to stay and hear what he had to say. He wanted them to hear the gospel and be saved, but he recognized that that was not going to happen if they were hungry. He fed them physically so they're able to be fed spiritually. Final thing that Jesus teaches us in just these couple sentences about missions is actually the last thing that he says in this passage, and it's this: you go give them something to eat. Now imagine you're the disciples. There's 5,000 men plus women and children. They weren't even added into that number. that were there, and they were all hungry and needed to eat. And Jesus says, yeah, you give them something to eat. You know, if I'm the disciples, I'm thinking, no, Jesus, you give them something to eat. What we find out happens in this story, and what is good for us to remember and know here is that it wasn't just about finding the fish and the loaves and then Jesus performing, the miracle. The key for us here is that Jesus helps them, but he didn't do it for them, right? It wasn't his job, it was their job. He didn't say, oh, they're hungry, I'll feed them. Here, let me make bread fall from heaven. I've done that before. Let me take these stones and turn them into bread to feed everybody. He had done that before, but he wasn't going to do that this time. It wasn't his job. It was their job. We often don't think about the story that way, do we? We focus on the miracle of Jesus expanding the effort of the disciples, but we don't think about the fact that Jesus could have but didn't just make food appear. He told the disciples to feed the people. It's that principle that he was teaching. They had to go find the food and hand it out, and they had to be willing first to take on the enormous task of feeding those people. Your next teaching note says this: when we take on the challenge, God provides what we need to complete the mission. See, Jesus was not going to do the work for them. It was their job, not his. It hasn't changed too much in the last 2,000 years. We've all been given the mission to go into the world. It's not an optional part of our faith. It's something we're all called to as believers. And that can look a lot of different ways. The way I do it may look different from the way you do it, different from the way she does it, different from the way he does it. That's fine. It doesn't have to all look the same, but it's part of what we've been called to do. And when we accept the challenge, like the disciples did here, God will provide what we need to complete the task. The disciples, they did the best that they could, and it wasn't even that great. They didn't collect much, but they did the best that they could. And then God took that and multiplied it and made it work. They had to take that first step, and actually really the second step too. And then Jesus helped them to finish the job. So we're going to take a short tangent, because what is a sermon without a little tangent, right? We'll take a short tangent and talk about food. Because I've worked here in the U.S. with at-risk children and families, and then also in Nicaragua and Dominican Republic and Haiti and Sierra Leone. And one question I get a lot is about food, right? People will ask, if God's so great and so loving, why are there children dying around the world of hunger? Why can't he provide enough food for them? And the answer to that is that we're the problem, not God. There's more than enough food in the world to feed everybody. World Health Organization put out their every decade report just a few weeks ago that says that we produce enough food in the world every year to feed 15 billion people. You will probably do the math in your head and know that that's double the population. The problem is distribution. There's a wide disparity between those who have more than they could possibly need on any given day and those that don't have the basics to get through that day. So the simple answer to the question, how does a loving God allow people to go hungry, is that he isn't allowing them to go hungry. We are. It's not a supply problem, it's a distribution problem. You've heard me say it before, probably from up here, and it's that this isn't a God problem, this is an us problem. And we can do better. In fact, we have to do better because empty stomachs have no ears. People have asked me before, why are you so passionate about missions, about kids around the world in need, and the kids here in this community that we work with? What makes you so passionate about it? And the best way for me to explain it to you is to tell you a little story. So about 2008, about 2 years after we opened our first orphanage in Haiti, a girls' home, we had about 14 10 and under girls living there. So 2 years in, one of the little girls who was 6 years old passed away. She had a heart condition that was, of course, undiagnosed and actually passed away playing outside with the other kids. Now, I had just come back from Haiti at the time, so I couldn't get there right away. I couldn't make the funeral. But a couple months later, I went down with two friends to do a memorial thing with the other girls. And on that trip, my friends that came with me introduced me to a song by an artist called Brooke Fraser. Don't even know who that is, really. I still don't to this day. Might be a Christian artist, might not. I don't know. It's not important. But the song that she wrote after she had spent some time with HIV orphans in Rwanda, and the chorus of the song is a paraphrase of a verse. And you can write this in the side notes if you want. 1 John 3:17 and 18. This is the paraphrase of it in the chorus. Says, now that I have seen you with my own eyes, and now that I have held you in my own arms, I am responsible. Right? A great paraphrase of that verse in 1 John, if you look it up. And it is a mantra then that I have lived with, and my family has lived through. The crazy idea of Julie and I packing up a 11, 8, and 6-year-old and moving to Haiti and all of that comes out of this verse and that way of saying it in that song. And it is 2021, and all of us carry around in our pocket a supercomputer, right? This is like 25 times or something the power of the computer that took the spaceship to the moon, right? Supercomputer we all carry around in our pockets. We know everything that's happening in the world like the moment that it happens, right? Somebody is live tweeting the needs all of the time for us. Maybe like 15 or 20 or 25 years ago, we could have an excuse of like, I didn't know. But we don't have that excuse anymore because we all know. And if you didn't before this morning, well, I'm telling you now. All right, we like to talk in missions a lot about Matthew 25. If you know that story, that's where Jesus is separating the sheep and the goats. Right? And we really love the part where he says, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. We use that a lot in missions when we do something good, and we pat ourselves on the back with it, and that's fine, that's great, that's what that part of the story is about. But there's another half of the message that Jesus was giving that we don't like to talk about as much. And that's the part where he says, you saw me in need, and you didn't help me, because whatever you didn't do for the least of these, you didn't do for me. So why, am I so passionate about this? Why do I believe that everybody needs to be part of this? Because it's our responsibility, right? Now that I have seen you with my own eyes, or held you in my own arms, or heard about you with my own ears, I am responsible. So what can we do about it, right? Around here we talk a lot about being part of the solution and not part of the problem. So what can we do about it? I'm going to give us 3 things. The last teaching note of today is going to be 3 things that we can practically do about it. The first one, you can care. It can matter to you that people that God created and loves and sent his son to die for are hurting and struggling. Instead of flipping past it on social media or flipping past it on the 6 o'clock news or ignoring it because they're not our kids, they're not our country, not our people, not my responsibility, we can decide that because they all matter to God, they all matter to you too. One of the most poignant scenes in the movie Hotel Rwanda, and you can miss this because it goes by real fast, but the guy from Rwanda is watching the news with some of the UN guys, right? They're watching the American news. And they're showing the genocide in Rwanda. And the Rwandan guy says, oh, great, now that people see what's happening, they'll want to help us. And the UN guy says, listen, I wish that it was that way, but people are going to see this on their news and look up and say, oh, that's too bad. And go back to eating their Salisbury steak and never think about it again. That's the reality for most of us, but we can do better. We can care. It can break your heart. It can make you uncomfortable. It can keep you up at night thinking about it. You have no idea the difference it will make in your mindset and the way that you look at things if you first decide to care. Second, you can give. And I know that sounds like an ask for money, and we just did that for 2 weeks, but it kind of is, right? Because the reality is that it takes some money to pull off these kinds of projects. It takes money to feed kids. It takes money to run schools and orphanages and all these other types of programs. Right? And we have places here with Crosspoint where you can plug in and give, and the amount doesn't really matter. We will make it work. We have students in Sierra Leone, secondary school students who need sponsorship. I have an orphanage full of kids in Haiti who need sponsorship. We have ways that we can connect you through Crosspoint to give. Right? And it can be, Sierra Leone and Haiti. It could be the local Morning Star down here. It can be the Bethesda Mission, any of those things. But if we aren't giving to missions, now's a good time to start, right? $5 a month, $10 a month, $20 a month to one of these missions is important. The third thing that we can do is go. Now, I know that flying 35 hours on an airplane to Africa or traveling in the back of a pickup truck in the hilly mountains of Haiti or handing out socks to the homeless at midnight under the bridge here in Harrisburg with Bethesda Mission might not be for everybody. I get it. There are some people that can't physically do those things. Now, if you can, you should, because not only are we called to, but you'll learn a lot from it too. But if you really can't physically do it, notice I said can't, not won't, two very different things. If you can't do it, then you can still be a part of going. You can assist those who are physically going by helping them prepare, help them to gather supplies maybe that they need. You can help them to organize, help them to fundraise. Or here's a big one that's really easy for us to do because we just have to hit a share button on social media, and I know that all of you do. I see your social media. I know that you know how to do it. We can advocate and show awareness by sharing things about what's going on. If someone from your church is doing this or this ministry in your area is doing this, share it. Be an advocate. Put the information out there for others. That's all part of the going as well. So I want to almost close with this morning, that missions is everywhere. Right? We've talked mostly this morning about missions in a global sense, and that's, of course, a part of it. But it's also around here and in our own backyard. I believe, based on Acts 1:8, and you can write that in your little side notes as well if you want. We're not going to take the time to read it now. But in Acts 1:8, I believe that it calls us to all be involved in missions in some way on 3 levels. So in that verse, it talks about going and being a witness in Jerusalem, in Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Now, we don't live in the Middle East, so that means nothing to most of us. But what they're saying, what it means is that we should be involved in a mission locally, which was Jerusalem for them, and then in our regional area, their Judea and Samaria, and then around the world. Right? I believe that all of us should be involved in some way, the caring, the giving, the going, in all 3 of those areas. We should find some sort of local mission to get behind, and that can be right here in this church. It can be the food pantry, the clothing connection, Crosspoint Kids, Unite Student Ministries, some sort of local ministry. A regional ministry to get behind, maybe it's Morning Star or Bethesda, one of those kinds of things. And a global ministry to get behind in some way. It might not look the same in all 3, and that's fine. But we should all be involved in some way. Because that verse in Acts, what it doesn't say is to do just one of the 3. I used to say it like this, and it's a little heavy-handed, but I used to say it like this. If you had a test with 3 questions on it, and you only got one of those right, you would fail the test. 33% is failing. If you got 2 of them right, 67% is still failing. The only way to pass the test is to get 3 out of 3. And if we're called to do local and regional and global in some way, and we're not doing all 3, then we're failing. I think when we can help ourselves by remembering that it's not about us, it's about them. We are called to reach out to people with a message of Jesus' love for them, but we also have to remember that empty stomachs have no ears. We need to meet their physical needs before trying to meet their spiritual needs. And that it can be scary, but if we take the step of faith to dive in with God on some sort of mission, that He'll give us what we need to complete that task. In closing this morning, we've all heard the story, I think we've all heard it, of the starfish. Right? We've all heard that story. Two guys are walking on the beach, and 1,000 starfish have washed up on shore. And those 1,000 starfish are all going to dry up and die there in the sand. And the one guy reaches down and he picks one up and he throws it back into the ocean. And the other guy says, look at all these, what difference is that really going to make? And the one who threw it in says, well, it made a difference to that one. And that's where the story ends. And I think that is a terrible ending to the story. Because 999 starfish are still going to die. That's not a great ending to the story. What if instead the story ended this way? The friend said, oh, that makes sense. And he picks one up and he throws it in. And then the two guys fishing over here saw, and they each pick one up and throw it in. And then the family up here eating ice cream on the boardwalk notices, and 6 of them come down and pick one up and throw it in. And the guys playing volleyball over here notice, and the 10 of them come, and the 4 people suntanning over here notice, and they come, and before we know it, 1,000 people have each picked up one starfish and thrown it into the ocean. And now all 1,000 starfish get to live instead of just one, because everybody did their little part. That's missions. Right? I don't expect somebody to come up here and write a check and give to Dave or I and say, I'll just cover the cost of all the kids in the orphanage in Haiti or all the kids at the school in Sierra Leone. And it's probably better that they don't, because that's not how it's supposed to work. I would much rather 30 people come up and say, hey, I'm going to give $20 or $10 a month or whatever. We make it that way, because that way everybody's doing their part, and that way all of the starfish get to live. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this morning. I thank you for everybody watching us at home on our live stream, everybody here that came out this morning in the building. Lord, be with us. I pray for each of us here that this week, you speak to us, you open up a door, you show us something, you give us a little glimmer or a thought of both a local and a regional and a global ministry that we can get behind in some way, shape, or form this week and moving forward. Lord, may each one of us find something here and there and everywhere to get behind and to be a part of, to bring people to you. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.